What if I told you, the United States almost never happened? Imagine a handful of rebellious colonies, tiny compared to the world's superpower at the time, standing up to the British Empire, the empire where the sun supposedly never set. Yet somehow, through protests, battles, and a bold declaration, these colonies transformed into what would become the United States of America. Today, we're breaking down exactly how the USA was established, and trust me, it's a story of courage, chaos, and a little bit of luck. Before the stars and stripes, before the land of the free, America was just 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast. Life looked very different. Think small towns, farms, wooden houses, and people who still thought of themselves as British subjects. But tensions were brewing. And like any good story, it all started with conflict. Part 1: The Spark Before the Fire. The colonies weren't originally dreaming of independence. For decades, most people were content living under British rule, as long as they could farm, trade, and live peacefully. But things started changing in the mid-1700s. Here's the setup: Britain had just fought an expensive war against France, the 7 Years' War. Victory came at a price, and Britain wanted the colonies to help pay that bill. So, they introduced taxes like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. Now, imagine being told you had to pay more money, but you had zero say in how that money was used. That's where the famous phrase comes in: no taxation without representation. Colonists were frustrated, not just about money, but about freedom. Why should decisions about their lives be made in London, thousands of miles away? These frustrations exploded into moments like the Boston Tea Party in 1773, when colonists dumped British tea into the harbor as a bold protest. At this point, the colonies weren't just annoyed, they were angry. And Britain? Britain wasn't about to back down. Part 2: The Road to Revolution. When protests turned to violence, the situation spiraled. In 1775, the first battles broke out at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. Shots were fired, and suddenly, what started as protests had turned into war. Here's the twist: the colonies didn't even have a proper army yet. Imagine farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers grabbing muskets and facing off against one of the strongest military forces in the world. That's exactly what happened. But leadership emerged. The Second Continental Congress appointed George Washington to command the Continental Army. Washington wasn't just a general, he became a symbol of unity and resilience. And while soldiers were fighting on the battlefield, thinkers and writers were fighting with ideas. One of the most influential voices was Thomas Paine, whose pamphlet Common Sense argued that independence wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Millions read it, and the idea of breaking away from Britain spread like wildfire. Part 3: The Birth of a Nation. By 1776, the colonies reached a turning point. On July 4, they declared independence. The Declaration of Independence, written mainly by Thomas Jefferson, was more than just a piece of paper. It was a bold statement to the world: we are no longer colonies. We are a free nation. Think about how risky that was. These leaders were literally signing their names on what Britain would call treason. If they lost, they could face death. But their courage lit the spark of a brand new country. Of course, declaring independence was one thing. Winning it? That was another challenge. The Revolutionary War dragged on for years. At times, it looked hopeless. Washington's army was often outnumbered, underfed, and undersupplied. But they had determination, home field advantage, and eventually, crucial help from France, who joined the fight against Britain. Finally, in 1781, the Americans won a decisive victory at Yorktown. And by 1783, with the Treaty of Paris, Britain officially recognized the independence of the United States. Against all odds, a new nation was born. Part 4: Building the Foundation. But here's the thing: just winning independence didn't magically create the USA we know today. The real challenge was building a government. At first, the colonies tried something called the Articles of Confederation, but it gave too little power to the central government, and things got messy. So, in 1787, leaders met again in Philadelphia. This time, they created the U.S. Constitution, a framework that balanced power between the states and the federal government. They also added the Bill of Rights, protecting freedoms like speech, religion, and assembly. It wasn't perfect. In fact, many issues, like slavery and equality, remained unresolved. But this Constitution became the backbone of American democracy, guiding the country for centuries to come. Part 5. Why it matters today. So how was the USA established? It wasn't just about battles or treaties. It was about people daring to imagine something bigger, a nation built on the idea of liberty and self-government. From protests over tea to the writing of the Constitution, the story of America's birth is one of determination, struggle, and vision. And here's the kicker: the United States is still writing its story. The founding was just the first chapter, the rest is up to every generation that comes after. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button, subscribe for more history told in a way that makes sense, and drop a comment. Which moment in America's founding do you think was the most important? Because history isn't just in textbooks, it's the story of how we got here.